Welcome everyone, Brian at Fort Hays State University Web Development Club. In today's meeting we're going to talk about independent contracting with web developers. So let's begin with the agenda. In this meeting we'll talk about how to develop a web contract between you and a client, and when building a website, what will your privacy policies look like, and the code you'll be creating. Will this be open source? Can others borrow it? Will you attach a license to it? Once you have the client, we'll also need to discuss an interview process. So what does your interview look like when you're qualifying your client? And finally, while building the website, what are some tools you can use to manage your project? Let's get started. So web contracts, I took cyber law, and that was at Fort Hays approximately 3 years ago. And that gave me kind of a whole rundown on what I needed to know when I'm working with a client. Now, I work for a small business, and you may come to find that you will work with large corporations, but this is good information to know because you will be on the receiving end of the contract when you're signing the employee handbook. So, in this situation, I'm going to go through some tools that I found online, in other words, templates that third parties have provided, and then show you what I've created. Now, Go Nitro, We Are Indie, and Hello Bonsai are just a few of many tools for independent contractors that can create, basically it's a paid program or paid subscription that gives you access to lots of templates, e-signature software, and human resource references. So just giving you or your team an ability to function without having to hire an accountant and then a legal team and so on. So it helps to save your team or your business a little bit of money. And that would be a great place to get started, as they do all the research to keep you informed, and then you don't have to do all that and start from scratch. So let's go ahead and take a look at my template. As you see right here, I'm starting off with my name as an independent contractor working with whatever the name of the corporation is. Whether it's an LLC, whatever they're doing business as, you would fill in here. And this would be their names. So in some cases I may have, let's say it's ABC, and I'm working with Google, you see. So you're going to have to look at who the legal entity is for the business. Just ask them when you create the contract who they would like it to be made between. Next is the contractor responsibilities. This would be what you're committing to. So for instance, I commit to 30 or 40 hours per week of working on your website, or in this case you'd put client name, website. Compensation, maybe it's $30 or $40 per an hour. Conditions, and this would put any conditions. Client must be available during 2 hours of each week for discussing progress. And then rights of ownership. Now, then that would be where you would say I own whatever I create, or you may license, which we'll talk more about licensing, anything I create indefinitely or however long the license is. And then notice of non-fulfillment. If you don't get paid, then I am able to collect, if you don't finish the project, the difference of hours worked. So you get at least the hours you put in if you're unable to complete, whether it's on your end or their end. Notice of non-payment, settlement would occur in court jurisdiction, and then I live in California, so I would put El Dorado County. That's where I live. California. And if you've ever read a terms of use, when you sign those electronic user license agreements, you'll see similar language. The estimate, you would just say this is an estimate only, and then put the costs, VAT, and hours to perform the job. Notices, we had COVID-19, so maybe you put something like COVID-19 may prevent us from working face to face, so we may have to use Zoom or other software to communicate remotely. And then here you finally put your signature, they sign it, and client signs it, and date. So let's take a look at what I've created here for a past contract. Brian, doing business as Brian's Web Consulting. Now, if you're not a actual business, because then you would need to file a business license, but if you don't have a business license, you check with your state, but in my state I can file under my own name, and when I file my taxes, it would be simply filing an additional form on my taxes under my own name, so I don't have to get a business license. But that's all going to be dependent on your county and your state, because they may require you to have a business license. And then the date, the 22nd of September, in this case it would be the 23rd, because that's what the day is. You don't want to get in any kind of pickle where you mislabel the date or try to backdate it or post date it. Make sure you use the date you're going to sign it. Agree to, and then hire Brian as an independent contractor for a short term of 30 days. And then under this, you could also say something like it may take longer. We can discuss if project changes occur, such as they want to add things to the project that you didn't account for. And then here, you're just going to set up what you're going to put in. So the contractor responsibilities, I put here 40 hours per week. Here I'm just saying what I'm going to set up. And then I'm also outlining, in this case, I'm setting up an intranet for this customer. And it's going to be, very specific, 6 computers. So there's no guessing and what's going to be involved. And they're going to need an Office 365 subscription, which they'll pay for to Microsoft. And that's the only way that this will work. So make sure you set them up that they understand there'll be reoccurring costs in your contract, so you know they understand what's involved. The intranet will be developed using Microsoft SharePoint, connect 4 printers to the Wi-Fi. And if you notice here, this is beyond the website development. And a lot of times when you're an independent contractor, they're going to need additional services that are just not web development procedures. So it's good to get familiar with small business and learn how you can help them be outside of just web development. Building websites for them is great, but they're also going to need ads. They're also going to possibly need intranet stuff. So consider those things. So just be aware that you may want to be thinking outside the box how you can help them without them having to go and find cybersecurity experts, find people to do their marketing for them, and also finding other people that can help them with things that are outside your normal scope. So that means studying. You want to learn everything that you can to help a small business, and that'll help capture more revenue for your business. In addition, it'll help you be more dynamic in being able to serve your client. Then I specify to them how I'm going to set up the Wi-Fi network. It could be for their tablets, smartphone, e-readers, and so on. And then I tell them this setup includes up to 6 computers or devices, as long as they have an Office 365 account for each user or device, and then the Office 360 Cloud. I'll create a little cloud for them with 20 folders, and then basically I'm going to show them everything I'm going to do right here in responsibilities, and we'll talk about how you get to that point in developing a questionnaire to qualify your client. That's a needs assessment in the sales world. That's what we call it. Next, on the compensation here, so we said maybe like $40 per hour. In this case, I agreed to them to a pay rate of $35 per hour. You could even do a flat fee per job. I tend to stick with hour because you never know how long a job's going to take, and if you put in less time or more time, it may work out in your favor or their favor. To just be fair with both sides, I'd go hourly, and that way if you don't finish the job, at least you know what you get paid for per the hourly. So I prefer to work hourly. If the client, and I put the client name here, decides to withdraw from this agreement, they would be responsible for the hourly pay rate that I've already put in. So that's why I tend to stick hourly, because then it's more easy, it's more transparent on how much they owe me. The rights to ownership, I put out here that any work I design becomes exclusive ownership of the client name. So in other words, they may be concerned as, do I have to license this or pay monthly fees or anything like that to use their images that they created with their graphics that they designed. So I just say, hey, this is all yours, and upon payment, you get this. So there is no dispute about who gets what. But I do put a little excerpt here that along the way, I'm going to derive skills from working with them. And a perfect example, I've worked with businesses where I felt, wow, I really understand their business. And in the meantime, they're going to be giving you information which is maybe proprietary technology that they don't want shared, but they maybe have to give you that knowledge so that way you can build their site. So the best thing to do in that case is set that language in here as rights to ownership is any proprietary technology that they've specified here. I am not able to compete against or use it. And then in some cases, if they have no technology that they're worried about, I made a little thing here that says, along the way, I'm going to derive skills. So let's say if I'm working with a dentist and I learn HIPAA compliancy, well, now I'm able to work with other medical professionals, and I wouldn't have known a lot had I not worked with this company. So I'm saying, hey, these skills I've learned along the way are knowledge that I've gained that I can use to work with other businesses. And even if it ends up being a competitor, I don't state that directly here that I can work with their competitors, but the language is clear enough that I'm going to gain skills that I can still perform my job for other clients that may be in a similar field. So this may be a point where they ask for a non-compete clause, where they say you agree. In other words, the contractor agrees to non-compete for at least 6 or 4 months or however long. What this looks like is maybe you go fill a job for another dentist who's nearby. Well, that could get into a little bit of a dispute as to whether you're competing against them. You just spend all that time trying to help gain them an extra footing in the marketplace, and now you're going to work with their competitor and do the same thing. So they may ask you for a non-compete clause, and that language you would put in here. Notice of non-fulfillment just simply says that if they don't, if you are unable to fulfill the agreement or they're unable to fulfill your needs, then you are going to collect the hourly for what you've already put in. Examples I like to include would be, I didn't get enough feedback from the team or from the owner, or I didn't get access to the things that I needed to fulfill the contract, or maybe there was unforeseeable circumstances. They couldn't afford the technology to do it, and maybe federal or local law didn't allow them. And then also, it may be outside your scope. And so if you can try to work around your scope and get comfortable beforehand. In other words, when I worked with one dentist, I didn't understand HIPAA compliancy entirely. So before I started working with them, I said, give me some time to understand HIPAA, and that'll save you some money because I'd have to charge you hourly. But it'd be advantageous for me to do it because I'm going to be able to work with other medical professionals. So in that instance, you may put things on hold until you have the skill set to fulfill the contract. And you can always fulfill the contract for a smaller agreement, such as just building their website, and other things could come later. And then I also have a notice for non-agreement. So if the customer, or the client in other words, doesn't pay me, then we may handle this in the dispute of the jurisdiction you live in. In this case, I was residing in Sacramento County, so I would put Sacramento County there, and maybe they would prefer a local jurisdiction closer to them. So this would be in the language you'd work out with them. So some of this language you draft up, and then you just ask them for an approval or pre-approval, and if everything looks good, they'll have you adjust the contract if needed, and then you can go to the signing table with them. And if you work remotely with them, you can use some third-party software like Adobe Sign or DocuSign, so then it becomes legally binding. Then the estimate, I work out the hours that I think each thing's going to take, and you'll never get it exact per se, so maybe I work a little more, maybe I work a little bit less, but here's the estimate that they agreed upon. So if I can try to stay within that, and then if you foresee something happening that needs to take longer, let them know as soon as possible and what those costs will take. So that way there is no dispute, and you don't have to go to not finishing what you agreed to fulfill, and then they only have to owe you the hourly. You could have made some additional if you just tell them, hey, I think this is going to take a few more hours than I anticipated. And the earlier you communicate those things, the easier it is to work out. And I give them a little bit expectation on how long it's going to take me. So 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the availability of me. And I do set a commitment with them because they may want to see my face a certain number of times each week, or via remote or in person. So I say, hey, look, I can commit to come into your office at least 2 times per week for up to 4 hours. A lot of times you're going to find that you need to train them on the software. So being able to be available to while you start working on it and show them why and how you're creating it will help be not only save time for training on the back end for them, but it'll also it'll save you time and them money, and it'll set the expectation early on that, hey, we're moving in the forward direction with the company, and this is happening at a pace hopefully that they can substantiate. So if this time is too much for them, then you could set this and be maybe once per week. I found that with companies is there'll be weeks you can't come at all, so you need to be able to be flexible with them, and that would be maybe it's going to take more than 4 to 6 weeks. In this particular contract, it ended up taking, I think, 2 or 3 months, and this was because of COVID, which goes right into notices here. So in notices, I live in a fire-stricken area. In other words, we're in a rural area where there's a lot of wildfires during the summertime, and some of these areas that I go to, roads are closed down while they're working to battle the fire. So just recently there was a fire not too far away from one of the clients that I work with, and some of the roads in the surrounding area were closed. In this case, I could put a notice that there might be ways that we could communicate remotely. Are you going to be available? And if they get a power shutdown, we call it a power safety shutdown here, they may not have access to these tools. So I just set the notice up front that some of these things may not be accessible on either my end or the client's end, and that we may have to work a little bit at a different pace. But another thing is that we may have to renegotiate our contract if it goes too far out and they need it done sooner or later. So there are some things you just want to outline here that what do you foresee that could cause a disruption in this? Maybe it's getting close to the holiday season and you'd like to go on a vacation. So you're saying, I do take a vacation during such and such time. Please honor that time for me. And then this is the signature part right here. 22nd day, September, Brian agrees to the term of this contract. And then the person signs on the same, or maybe it's a different day, I representing. So maybe you sign this on this day and then they sign it 2 days later when you bring it to their office. Generally, you probably want to sign it on the same day. That's my recommendation. And that's it for the contract. So I'll put this in the drive with this PowerPoint so everyone could use it and review it and let me know what you think. So we've talked about web contracts. Now let's move on to privacy policies. When whenever you create a privacy policy for a website, it's going to be based on not only federal law, but your state or local jurisdiction as well. If you're building a website like e-commerce that may be selling products across the world, the globe, excuse me, then the European Union, you may have to address their GDPR, which we'll talk about. And then these are just some resources for where I live. I have the California protections, and then I go to the government's website for the federal side, and then the European Union if I need to. So let's look at an example that I have here. In this website, I made it effective on the day I created it. There'll be times where law changes and you need to go in and update it. But the policy here is just simply language. Excuse me. So the policy here just simply covers the basics of what I have found for California's necessity is, and we'll talk about that right now so you can see why I created it a certain way. So in California, we have the California Consumer Privacy Act, and what this entails is it's similar in regards to the GDPR for the European Union, their rights as an internet user, and that is the right to know about how the business or the website's collecting their information and how it is shared to third parties, if it is, right to delete that personal information, and there are some exceptions, so maybe you can't delete it if federal law asks you to hold it for at least 6 months, so there are some restrictions here. And just clicking these will get me all the information I need to know. So check with your Attorney General's office, or just type in the state you live in and put privacy law for internet. The right to opt out, as well as for the sale of their personal information, and the right to non-discrimination. So when you go through these, it'll help outline how you should create it. And an easy way to help get you understanding of how to create that privacy policy for the website is to look at some of the ones that you've seen in that jurisdiction. So maybe if it's in the case of it being an e-commerce that works in California, I'm going to maybe look at some similar competitors that are on a larger scale and see what language they've drafted and kind of work with that. You don't want to necessarily use it verbatim. As a matter of fact, I would recommend not using it verbatim and writing out your own if possible, because it's not actually your created work at that point, and you may have to be paid, a paid customer or licensing that information. So just keep that in mind. It's best to draft your own things so you learn along the way, and then you save yourself a headache from legality of who owns the work. So my policy I created here, before we get to that, I want to show you the government's. Now, here, the one that makes the difference for protecting your privacy or showing what the privacy law looks like for federal is it's primarily going to be the Health Information or Health Insurance Portability Act, or HIPAA. And so by knowing HIPAA, you're going to be able to work with medical professionals, and that'll take some time to study. And if you ever need help with that, let me know. But that will open you up to a lot more clients. And the European Union, the GDPR, that's what they go off of. It's very similar in a lot of ways to the California's regulations, just different language. But the General Data Protection Regulation, like the right to be forgotten, or in this case, the right for your information to be deleted, they're in somewhat harmony with each other, but not entirely. So I recommend going through this. Me personally, I haven't done any GDPR privacy policies because I haven't had a need to work with abroad customers. But in the event you do, you know where to go. Now we'll go back to that privacy policy. So I made it effective on the day I initiated it. And the local jurisdiction for the law that I follow is Sacramento, California in this case. And I also want the privacy policy to outline who my host is. So if you have any questions as regards to how my host collects their information, such as their IP address and how they handle privacy regulations, they can reference that host. And in this case, it was an educational website, so I just put that you agree to use the terms of the server, which will be HostGator, and all the information is shared purposes for educational purposes only on my end. So what is shared? I just simply state it. They're really concerned about, do I share any information? I just say, I do not share any information that you provide on the site. But what do I collect? The only information I collect are the needs of the user. In other words, I'll need their email that they submitted if I need to respond to them for anything. And then the host of the website may have analytics beyond my control. I don't know those things, such as collecting IP addresses for visitors. And so they'd have to reference HostGator or the respective owners of the host. So in this case, can they opt out? Well, if they have cookies, I just let them know that, hey, you could disable cookies, and then that's one way you can opt out of get information being collected from third parties. And the disclaimer is that this information is for reference only, and it's not always going to be completely accurate, and it can change. So in other words, laws may change, and I want them to understand that I do my best to keep up, but as laws change, I might not get to every website that I create and update the policy. So under copyright of the respected owner, I'm just saying, setting the guideline that all this information that's on this website is under copyright. And that just simply means that if they want to use it, they need permission from the user. And we'll talk more about usage or licensing rights coming up, because that'll touch on it. But just remember that when you're creating a disclaimer, that you set that, hey, it's common practice to say don't use this information on this website to misuse, fabricate, or distribute without the permission of people of the owner, and follow the local laws. So I just simply say the author site's not liable for any information used, and it's only to the benefit of others. And when you see here the terms of use, you've seen similar language where you may put don't crawl, or copy of this website, web crawlers where they capture all the information, or iframe, along those terms. So this would be where you'd put that. And I put that this information shouldn't be used for profit purposes, but respecting federal law as well as my local jurisdiction, and be using this information in a manner that's legal. And so that's simply it. And if you have any questions on that, just let me know. But that covers privacy for website, privacy policies. So we just talked briefly about privacy policies. Next is licensing agreements. We talked about who owns what. We talked about it in the work contract of who has the rights of ownership for work you create, and also for privacy policy, who has the rights, what kind of rights do you have for others to use the information from your website. Generally, to start at the top down, when you're creating code, there's open source licenses out there, and you can just use one of these. And if you go to this website, Open Source Initiative or opensource.org, this will tell you the most popular licenses that are used for open source. So why would I need a license? A license is going to be beneficial if you're wondering how many people use this code that I create. If I right click and then I put inspect, and then I can see their code here, well, what stops them from just copying and then pasting that? So you're going to have some information here, and you're going to have graphics, and you're going to want to be able to say, hey, how can I allow this person to use it, or what restrictions will you place on them from using it? You wouldn't want a competitor just taking the exact language and setup that you have in code for your website and then starting their own website just like it. So this gives you that protection. So if you're not worried about competition, then you could just set an Apache license where, as long as they cite you as the owner and you follow the guidelines in the Apache license, then it's okay for them to use it. But you could also make your own. And so I've made my own, and then I've also taken documentation from other websites, and then they were under an Apache license, and I just said, okay, in this condition that says here, I need to say, hey, follow all this, and I'll give them their recognition for the works they created. So that would be down here of how I would reiterate their ownership and their rights or policies surrounding using that work. So I would put copyright when it was created, the name of the copyright owner. So if they put their Apache license, this is where I start filling in their information, and then this is where they can get that information for anyone else who's wondering what's in the Apache license. And then here it talks about what's it's considered as an as-is basis without warranties or conditions. Simply said, they're not going to guarantee anything that you're taking. So this is a point where you get to use someone else's work as long as you reiterate this license whenever you're using the work on the website you're creating or the software. So there are plenty more different licenses out here. There's a GNU, the General Public License, and then you got the MIT license, the Mozilla. And now let's talk about created work. So this is typical for software, but what about graphics? What about video, audio, music? So there's a different type of license known as the Creative Works or the Creative Commons license. So if you go to this website here, this is the most common that's used for created works like an artistic form. And there are different types. So if one person wants to be CC BY, this license allows you to redistribute, remix, and adapt. So if you see a CC BY, these are the standards that they follow for this work. So the CC BY and SA allows you to redistribute, remix, and so on, but credit must be given to the creditor and adaptations must be shared into the same terms. So if you're taking a song or a picture and you're making a deviation from it, you must also give other people the ability to use it and share it. So you'll use your license as you need to for works you created, and then you'll just want to look for how that Creative Commons license has been created and then follow it. So in other words, if I went to creativecommons.org, then I can go in and find their store. I could find, oh, that's their store, but I would go under Creative Commons. So if I went to google.com and I wanted to search for an image to use on my presentation, here I'd go, let's say, web page template. Now I got all these pictures here, and I can't just use one. You have to make sure you click Tools, Usage Rights, and Creative Commons Licenses. And so from here, it doesn't look like I could find any, so let's try another phrase like website builder. And then I'm going to go back to Tools. Don't forget to do that, because you got to go back in again, and it's kind of a pain, but you do there. So I couldn't find anything, so we'll just try website, real generic. And I got to do it again. I haven't found a shortcut for this yet. I'm sure some of you may have already. And then look, I found some Creative Commons images I can use. And so from here, you would look to see under what restrictions are there copyright. You can learn more. Images may be subject to copyright. And so you would look at this language, and if the language is under Creative Commons, more than likely all these images should be under Creative Commons. And I haven't gotten into a real depth research to see how this, to ensure the integrity if it's truly under Creative Commons license. But if you found a better way, let me know. So generally, if I see this is under Creative Commons, I just use this. And then one thing I've noticed, it doesn't actually always state what type of Creative Commons license is here. So you may have to do more research. But if you create Creative Commons platforms and you go here, you may see some that do follow those standards of telling you exactly what type of copyright agreement or Creative Commons license that they put under for their creative work. Then if you also use PowerPoint, you can go right into PowerPoint, and let me show you that here. So under PowerPoint, if you want to insert a picture, it's in the Creative Commons. Just go to Online Pictures. So when you go to Insert Picture, you're going to choose Pictures, Online Pictures, and then this stuff's already in the Creative Commons, so we'll put a website. And you could click off of it and then get every image that's found on Bing. But if you plan to use this for any commercial purposes, you definitely want to click the Creative Commons only. You may get around if it's for educational purposes under the fair use doctrine for copyright. But in the event you're doing this for commercial, like building a client's website, you definitely want to use Creative Commons only. And then from here, you can get some images. There are lots of platforms out there that you can share, such as we've seen here. But just follow. Let me go back to the page here. But just follow your gut instinct. If you think you're taking someone's information and you haven't looked at or been able to find a licensing agreement, maybe you want to look for another area or a different image or resource. And so that covers, let's go back there. the licensing. And what my licensing looks like is when I create an HTML file, I put my copyright, I put my own language here. So I'm not using an Apache license or any other license. I just made my own language for my own license. And then I put, you just have to acknowledge the source. You can use my information, but just put my name, the URL where you got it, and the date or year that you accessed it. But some of the work that I've even used has been under Apache license. So maybe I'm using Bootstrap and they're under a certain license for someone's work. Then I would go through here and go, okay, if they're under the Apache license, then I need to put the Apache disclaimer that we talked about here. And so that disclaimer would be put there. So we found that again at opensource.org, and at the bottom here, I just cut and paste this. Now I can use that person's work if they're under the Apache license. And then you just fill out the year, the name of the owner, and then that's pretty much it. Just make sure you remember that it's NAS's basis. And then I put a little excerpt here just to remind me of, why I use other people's work, how I use it. So this is just when I reinforce my own learning. I say, hey, if I believe in the product and I practice repairing the product, I'm compensating myself for it. I want to make sure that I understand, in other words, the language I'm reading. And in here, it says in that license, I could redistribute for derivative works. That's what entitles me the right to use this to make it the way I want to make it. So this is just my own recognition that I read this Apache license and I know exactly where I got the language from that says I can use it. And then I put my own quotes in here why my intent to using it. And so then I put my code in here, notice of existing sources. So if there's any other licensing on top of the Apache license, I can put it here and cite those users as well, or those creators. So that's it for licensing agreements. Next is client interviews and assessments. So I created a nice little template here that I've been able to compile over time and with different resources online, trying to figure out, okay, what's the whole thing here look like. And these are open-ended questions. So when I create a Google form here, this is what I submit to the potential client saying, here, if you want me to build your website, please fill this out. Once I'm notified, I go through and it says what they tell us about their company. It's a required question, hence the red asterisk there. And then what type of services do they provide? So I'm getting to know my customer, what sets them apart from their competition, so I know how to build their website. And this case would be a great opportunity to have some sales experience. I've worked in numerous sales jobs where understanding your client, and then when you go to build a website, you also know how to sell your client's product for them and using the language. But if you don't have sales experience, the client knows what separates them from the rest, and you just want to get that language in there and ask them how you want that distributed over the website. And so just filling this out here will give me all the information we need to get started. And then after I get that information, I can start building a proposal, the estimated cost that'll be involved for that contract that we talked about. Where's that contract? Right here. So then I can put in my responsibilities. So check this out. It's in the Drive, the Google Drive for the FHSU Web Development Club, and let me know what you think if you have any questions or input to share. Lastly, we'll finish up with project management tools. Once you start building the customer's website, you're going to want to have some way of keeping progress, especially if you're working with multiple people. So whether it be managers that work for the company or graphics designers that you had to employ on your own end, there might be several people working on this project. So you can use some of the tools that they've recommended from these third-party websites. And so some of these will look like this one. They say WP Project Management, WordPress Project Manager, Trello. Let's take a look at Trello. I've used it. It's actually pretty good. It's something I used when they were in their infancy back in 2018, but since then they've grown. And now I would say they've got more features to make it easier to collaborate with multiple people, and they've even put on templates to help you get started. So if you're doing a business, this may be more on the side of just business, not as to a web designer. So you may go into design, or you may even just look for one like web development. So we got one here, and they've helped kind of build the template so you don't have to start from scratch. You're gonna have your phase one testing this person has, and then what do I need to fix and upgrade? And you create a card for each one of these tasks you're going to be working on. Tasks you're in the middle of doing that you have already started, you put here, and then new features. So this is the cycle of software development. You would start putting what your new features will look like in the future, and then the backlog of things that you have to work on, such as maybe you have some errors or some things that are working as expected. And then you can collaborate, and you have two people here collaborating with each other. It's a public item, and so you can separate that to however you want the visibility of this project to be. And I think this is a great tool to get started. I use also personally Jamboard. It's very simple, but I work alone most of the time, except with the owners and the companies that I work with. And Jamboard is in the Google, and it's right here. And so one example is I was working on a virtual channel for Fort Hays. This was maybe similar to Tiger, but it was something I was working on privately before Tiger came out. That's the social platform for Fort Hays. And so I was learning in this yellow card, and then this was when I was getting more into the research and then the policies, and this when I was acting on very specific things, and then all the way to the finish line where we launched the platform. So we didn't finish with this research because Tiger came out, and then since then we've been putting this on hold and seeing if Tiger is a great solution. In other words, we may visit in the Student Senate other options like using Slack or Discord for an official FHSU communication hub. But right now things are going well for this project, and that's outside the scope of this presentation. But research your project management tools and find one that works for you, and that'll help things move along accordingly. Thanks for listening, and provide any feedback. I love hearing what you experience in your path.